Hey guys, since it broke my heart in class today since everyone hated rotoscoping so much and Ron's examples were more art based than visual effects based, no one really was excited or saw how it was useful. So I'm gonna show a couple of examples about rotoscoping purely for rotoscoping's sake, less than just fixing hypothetically damaged green screen footage, just so you guys can see some other tips and just how it might be more interesting. So here's a bunch of fake shit with rotoscoping in it, and now I'm going to show you how I turn this boring shot with no green screen into an explosion fest. I'm sick. So for this shot here, we have a door, and then I put a bunch of explosions behind the guy. So you can see here, those are all the roto points. And I just did one giant roto track. I didn't track individual body parts, which I will show where that became a problem later. But since it was such a short track, it didn't really matter. Two masks I had was the one big one around him and then one in between his legs there. So the only time that became an issue was when his gun separated from his shoulder here. I had to move a bunch of those points after one frame. And you can see I lost detail on his fingers because I ended up moving half the vertices that were on his fingers over to in between his neck and his gun. So that would be a situation where you would want to separate body parts for sure. Another thing to just check out is that I did not keyframe every single point. A lot of these I left a couple frames in between because the actors didn't really move that much, especially in this little chunk right here. The only time they really started moving a bunch was when he starts to turn around. But for the most part, most of those points I could move like 20 points at a time because there's a lot of points and there's a decent amount of keyframes, but there's not that much work going on in between them. Another thing Ron didn't point out today is there's some options to smooth up the edges. You can feather the edges to kind of blur the edges, and then you can also use the mask expansion tool to compensate for that kind of effect. It's recording, and then I'll start off like this.
But I don't, how do I know?
Because if I use my fuck. So another time it's useful to do masking is like if someone exits a green screen. Like in here, there's just a couple frames where I went outside the green screen. So that was an easy thing to fix in post. And something that it would have been more of a pain in the ass to situate myself in front of the green screen perfectly, or I could just do 5 minutes of roto work. So that's what I chose. So also, I had to do a bunch of roto work to cut out the chair that I was sitting on, but it worked out pretty well for the shot combined with the green screen. Um, Another time rotoscoping is useful for more straight up visual effects is when the location you're at, there's no way you're going to be able to get a green screen up there, so especially for like set extension stuff. So obviously, if you've been in the strip, you know half this shit doesn't exist. Um, so the point in the video that I separated the real environment from the fake China houses was at these flags here. And obviously had to rotoscope the flags because they move a bunch. So if you just try to rotoscope these flags traditionally, it would be a huge pain in the ass because the footage is super shaky. So I could rotoscope a little bit of it and try and do those in between frames. But just the fact that the footage is shaky means I would have to pretty much move it every single frame, especially when it gets shakier later on. So something to think about is the smoother your footage, the easier it is to work with. So I stabilized that footage and then re-imported the flags as completely separate clips to rotoscope, which minimized the amount of work I had to do on it. You can see over 14 seconds, I have about as many masking points as I did in the first shot I did with the door, which was just 1 second. So the other flag was a little bit more difficult, but doing that really helped sell this shot and blend the two environments into each other. Okay, so another other thing to think about is when you want to use shortcuts in your rotoscoping. For example, in this video, this street lamp up here is from the actual real video, but it's in front of a bunch of fake shit. So you could do rotoscoping, but you'd have to move it each frame by frame, which would be annoying. So what I did was I took the layer, I rotoscoped it once, and then I made it a still image by right-clicking it, going to time, and freeze framing it. And then I motion tracked that to the background because that was faster than keyframing the mask. And I did that for all these streetlights here and some of the sides of the building since I had a fake background here. Yeah, so this whole thing, the fake elements in the background, this is what the background actually is, and then I wanted to add this building. So instead of rotoscoping the trees, which would have been a pain in the ass and I couldn't key out the sky, I added pictures that I just motion tracked in. So I did all this within After Effects, and you can see it's a little glitchy around the edges here, but I could have made that look better if I wanted to. But so that's how I did that. I actually, speaking of foliage, I did a Luma mat, or a Luma key rather, on the tree here. So instead of tracing around that, you can key out the brighter portion, which since there's sky in the background, that works. So